We're going to go right to Europe. We're going to talk about Portugal. We have Charles Forelle, who is in London. Charles, how's it going?
Good morning. All is well.
Good, good. So tell us about Portugal. I mean, it seems like, the moment of truth nears. That was the headline on your story this morning. What's going on in Portugal?
Well, the curtain is up on springtime here, and Portugal has a couple of months to really go in one of two directions. They can end up needing more money from the Eurozone, another bailout, or they can sort of miraculously improve or greatly improve their confidence among investors and really rally and survive on their own without additional money. But it's a fork in the road for Portugal at this point, and really for the Eurozone. The question of whether the Eurozone is again going to have to open its wallet to help a troubled country. So Portugal already has had a bailout, but there's going to be some questions about whether it needs another one.
Charles, what's the timetable for what Portugal has to accomplish? You just mentioned a couple months. I understand they have some big debt obligations they need to meet around mid-2013, but they would need to wrap up the financing for that much sooner, right?
Yeah, so basically, Portugal has, under the terms of its existing 78 billion euro bailout, needs to borrow from the markets in 2013 to fund a bond repayment in September 2013. So there's enough money in the bailout, but not enough to cover that bond repayment. So the way these bailouts work, particularly with the International Monetary Fund, is they require that the countries be financed for 12 months ahead of time. So starting around this summer, there's going to be an evaluation of whether Portugal is really in a position to raise money from the markets. Time is running short. There are probably 3-4 months before somebody has to make a decision about whether Portugal can in fact access markets. At this point, it can't. The bond yields are simply too high.
It's interesting you say that, Charles, because the European issue in general just seems to have been put on the back burner, at least for global markets, at least for what we've seen in 2012. Is there a time where Europe is going to really flare up again? And it seems like Portugal, if Portugal is next, what time horizon are we looking at?
Oh, you could have a number of things that could flare up. It keeps us busy over here. We don't want to be ignored, after all. So, there's Spain, there's Italy. There are continued questions about whether the ECB's injection of cash into the banking system is going to be enough to forestall concerns about those countries. But Portugal is probably the most pressing, just because it has this funding wall that approaches. And really, Europe is going to have to make some decisions. They can decide, look, Portugal has done a good enough job, and therefore we'll give it a little bit more money to cover this gap. Or the Europeans decide, look, we can't just continue to give money to these countries if they're not improving fast enough, and could call on private sector debt restructuring like we saw in Greece, which would which would obviously upset creditors and would upset markets. So there is a moment of choice there, and that's probably coming reasonably soon this year.
One of the challenges that Portugal faces, and this was pointed out in Charles's story, is that unlike Spain and Italy, where banks from those countries started buying the debt of those countries, Portuguese banks haven't been doing that. So that's a hurdle for them to overcome. Charles, the government there in Portugal said that they would be willing to do more austerity. Is that tenable? Is that practical for Portugal? I mean, the economy is not growing. It would seem to make things much more difficult for them.
Yeah, Portugal has had more success than Greece has had in actually implementing the budget cuts and the budget austerity that it has promised. The trick is that it's difficult to do that in the face of a consistently declining economy. Unemployment is high and rising and is above forecast. The economic growth is down. The economic contraction is down, and it's down worse than forecast. So when you sort of combine those two things, it's difficult to see how you're going to have the tax revenues and the tax revenues that you expect in your budget plan. So it's difficult. It's very difficult to do. And Portugal this year, as it did last year, had to do some accounting maneuvers to make it under its budget deficit targets, which demonstrates that it is not an easy climb.
All right, Charles. Well, great. Thank you so much. Obviously, this is a very important issue that seems to be a little bit under the radar right now. But
yeah, it's percolating now.
It is percolating.